I'm Elena, and for 12 years, I was the first one in and the last one out at Virion Systems. That wasn't just a habit. It became my identity. While others still cradled morning coffee or packed up sharp at 5, I was already elbows deep in code, untangling the silent chaos no one saw but everyone depended on. I didn't mind the work. What I minded was disappearing inside it. Somewhere along the way, I became the person people assumed would just make things run like a server no one notices until it fails. I handled infrastructure and back-end logic, but also made sure the onboarding process didn't break when a new hire logged in for the first time. I fixed broken Wi-Fi during meetings, redid slides when someone forgot a graphic, and stayed late to deploy updates that couldn't risk downtime during office hours. These weren't in my job description, but if I didn't do them, no one would. They called me dependable, quietly efficient. One manager once said I was the glue of the team, but always in passing like a footnote. They liked that I didn't demand the spotlight. They liked me most when I stayed invisible. My name never made the headlines when the company landed a funding round. It was always about the visionaries, the founders, the men who talked fast in polished blazers. Meanwhile, I was resetting passwords for half the team, cleaning up rushed commits that would have crashed the staging server if I didn't intervene. I kept telling myself it was okay, that some people build and some people take credit, that I didn't need applause as long as things worked. But over time, that story stopped comforting me. I watched junior engineers come and go. Many of them leaned on me in their first few months. I walked them through the architecture, explained why our deployment pipeline was structured the way it was. I patched their bugs without making them feel stupid. They thanked me sincerely, but still, I stayed in the background. Some days, I caught my reflection in the dark monitor screen after everyone had left. Hair pulled back bags under my eyes, face lit only by lines of code. I looked like someone keeping a machine alive, not a person being valued for doing it. And yet, I stayed. Not out of fear, but because part of me still believed that being reliable would be enough. That someday, someone would see all the pieces I held together, all the fires I put out before they spread. But years passed. I stopped getting invited to brainstorms. Promotions went to louder voices, usually ones who asked me to proofread their proposals before sending them in. It didn't feel like betrayal exactly, more like erosion. Quiet, gradual wearing me down without anyone noticing. I started to realize the system didn't reward consistency. It rewarded spectacle. And I wasn't built for spectacle. I was built to make sure the gears turned when everyone else forgot the gears even existed. That's where I was when everything began to unravel. Not bitter, not broken, just tired of holding the weight while being told it wasn't heavy. The first intern arrived in the spring. She barely knew how to clone a repository, yet somehow she was shadowing Matt in meetings by week 2. By the end of the month, there were 3 more just like her, all young, sharp-looking, and strangely confident, despite glaring gaps in experience. They weren't mean, just lost. They asked good questions, and I tried to help, though it slowed my day down to a crawl. They always hovered near Matt's glass office, clutching tablets they didn't seem to know how to use. When they laughed at his dry jokes, he laughed back a little too loudly. When they fumbled a task, he brushed it off like it was endearing. He said they were here to learn, but it didn't look like learning. It looked like a theater. That spring, the hallway outside Matt's office began to feel like a different company. One I wasn't invited into. I wasn't asked to train anyone yet. I ended up correcting their code. I wasn't promoted, but I was expected to quietly supervise. At first, I brushed it off. Interns come and go. But this felt different. They were being given access, privileges. I walked past an open terminal once and saw one of them trying to navigate our production environment with credentials she shouldn't have had. When I asked where she got them, she smiled and said Matt told her to poke around. My stomach tightened. It wasn't just incompetence anymore. It was carelessness with things I had spent years protecting. Around the same time, I noticed changes in Matt's behavior too. He stopped replying to my update emails. Our weekly check-ins quietly vanished from the calendar. When I flagged a major security concern in the deployment pipeline, he responded with a single-word reply. Logged. That was when I started keeping my notes in a separate folder. Password protected. Time stamped. Not because I planned anything, just because something felt off. Decisions were being made behind closed doors. I'd walk past meeting rooms and see Matt with the VP of HR, their voices low, their laughter clipped. They'd go silent when I passed by. I didn't ask questions. I just made sure the system stayed up. It's strange how quickly invisibility becomes a strategy. The more I was pushed out, the more I listened, watched, logged what no one thought I saw. I used to believe Matt respected me. We weren't friends, but there was once mutual regard. We had built the first demo together in his garage. He trusted me with the foundation of the architecture. Now I was watching him hand over root access to someone who hadn't written a line of production code in her life. It wasn't just oversight. It was a shift, a rebranding of leadership around him, one where I didn't belong. And yet, the system still ran because of me. The database didn't break because I patched it quietly at 11 p.m. The internal tools didn't crash because I built redundancy into them without being asked. But that kind of labor doesn't trend on LinkedIn. It doesn't win you mentoring lunches or polish praise in team all hands. What I got instead were polite nods in the break room, a raised eyebrow when I asked about a meeting I wasn't invited to, an awkward silence when I offered to help on board the new dev, and Matt replied that Brent had it covered. Brent, the golden boy with a sharp haircut and only half a grasp of system dependencies. He couldn't fix a memory leak if it jumped out and bit him, but he had charisma, and apparently that mattered more now. That was the hardest part. Realizing I hadn't just become less visible, I'd become inconvenient. A reminder of a version of the company Matt was actively trying to erase. And I wasn't angry, not yet, just exhausted. Not from the work, but from pretending it wasn't happening. From watching someone I once trusted slowly dismantle the thing we'd built together, one careless favor at a time. The signs were subtle at first. A shift in tone during morning stand-ups, a missing name from a meeting invite, and a document marked confidential that somehow never made its way to me. I started noticing them all at once, like hearing a strange clicking in an old machine, better than anyone. Matt had grown colder, not in anger, but in detachment. He spoke to me like I was already halfway gone. Brent was being looped into planning sessions I used to lead, and no one told me why. One afternoon I passed the glass-walled huddle room and saw Matt with HR and a board advisor. They were laughing softly like old friends, then paused as soon as I came into view. I didn't stop walking. I didn't ask what it was about, but I felt it. That night I stayed later than usual. The office emptied out. I sat alone in the server room. Lights dimmed screens, casting that familiar blue hue on my hands. I logged into a section of our infrastructure I hadn't touched in over a year. It was a simple script, one I wrote on a weekend back when the platform still felt new and worth protecting. It wasn't sabotage, it was a safeguard, a dead man switch buried under layers of logic. Not destructive, just defensive. At the time, I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't plan to use it. But I knew too much about how easily power can be misused, especially by people who think systems exist for them to bend. I read through the lines slowly. My own work. My own words. It triggered if admin credentials were transferred too suddenly, or if a specific pattern of access requests occurred from unknown devices. A digital tether. Break the chain, and the system would quietly withdraw its permissions. I didn't activate it. I didn't tweak a line. I just reviewed it. Like checking the batteries in a flashlight before a storm you hope won't come. Because storms never announce themselves. They just arrive, and if you've waited too long to prepare, it's already too late. The calendar invite came with no subject, no agenda, just a quiet timestamp. 5 p.m., conference room, C. I knew what it meant the second I saw it, but I still clicked it open, like it might say something different. Matt was already seated when I arrived. He didn't look up right away. Beside him was the HR manager, Dana, who had always been polite, but distant. No one offered a chair. I didn't take one. "We'll keep this brief," Matt said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The company's undergoing a restructuring. Your role as it stands is being eliminated, effective immediately." His tone was smooth practiced. as if the words had been memorized like lines in a bad play. Dana nodded along, sliding a folder across the table with severance documents and HR contact information. I waited. For a thank you. For acknowledgement. For something human. It never came. I nodded once, calm and steady. Understood. That's all I said. Matt shifted like he expected an argument. When none came, he cleared his throat. We trust you'll handle this with the same professionalism you've always shown. We'd prefer no disruptions. You've always been reliable. I placed my company laptop gently on the table, the way you might set down something sacred that no one else understands. Everything you need is in there, I said. The demo, the architecture, the scripts. It's ready. There was a long pause. His shoulders dropped. Relief flashed across his face like he'd dodged a bullet. He almost smiled. Thank you, he said. That's appreciated. I smiled too. Just a little, just enough. I hope the investors enjoy the presentation. Dana looked up, unsure if that was meant to be a threat. It wasn't. It was the truth. Am I being escorted out? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Just a formality. Let's go, then, I said, still polite, still steady. The hallway felt colder than usual. No one looked up from their desks. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside without turning back. Behind me, the system waited. Every line of code was already humming quietly, prepared to do exactly what I built it to do. I walked 2 blocks before stopping at a small cafe on the corner. The place was quiet, with low lights, the kind of silence that let your thoughts settle without judgment. I ordered black coffee, took a seat by the window, and placed my phone face down on the table. The system needed exactly 10 minutes to register the change. The device handoff, the admin login revocation, and the new access signature under Brent's name. All of it was designed to trigger one silent condition. At minute 7, the cafe lights flickered. Just a coincidence, but it made me smile. I didn't touch my phone. I just watched the sidewalk people moving past like any other day. It felt strange to sit still, while something enormous moved quietly in the background. At minute 10, the first vibration came. I flipped the phone over. System alert, internal access error. Then another. Authorization loop detected. Demo scripts are inaccessible. The code was waking up. A text followed, from Owen, one of the few junior engineers who ever really listened. He said the system wasn't recognizing Brent's credentials. Everything was crashing. He asked if I had done any updates before leaving. I replied calmly, no updates. You might want to ask Matt. I imagined the room. Brent was in my chair, pale and sweating. Matt was pacing, barking orders and asking questions no one knew how to answer, not because the system was broken, but because no one else had ever truly known how it was stitched together. My fingers wrapped around the warm cup. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. It was more like confirmation. What I built was never as simple as they assumed. That quiet work can hold more power than noise. Another alert came in. Demo timeout error. Reboot failed. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, slow and steady. Outside, nothing looked different. But inside those glass walls, everything was falling apart, and for once, I didn't need to lift a finger. The calls started 5 minutes after the second alert. At first, it was just a text. Are you available? Then another. Something's wrong with the demo. Can we talk? I let the screen dim. I didn't rush. I stirred my coffee and watched a couple argue quietly at the next table. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Matt. He didn't leave a voicemail, just kept calling. I waited for the 5th ring, then hit ignore. A moment later, another message came in. Please, let's fix this. Whatever you want, we can talk about it now. Now. After years of brushing off my ideas, cutting me out of meetings, and using my work without my voice, now he wanted a conversation. I turned the phone over and let it rest again. A stillness settled in my chest. Not anger, not pride, just clarity. I had spent so long waiting to be heard that silence felt like control. 10 minutes passed. Then another message came in, longer this time. He said he was sorry, that he had underestimated me, that the board was watching and the demo was collapsing. He offered me a new title, CTO, lead architect, full autonomy. It would have sounded generous to someone who didn't know better, but I did. It wasn't respect. It was desperation wearing a new coat. I picked up the phone, typed one line, "I want to see what you do without me." Then, I powered it off. No dramatics, no flourish, just a clean break. He never replied. Not right away, not with words. But I knew what was happening on the other side of that glass building. The scramble. The confusion. The dawning realization that the one person they'd tried to erase had quietly taken the blueprint with her. And I didn't need to say another word, because everything I had to say was already speaking through the silence. The silence after everything fell apart wasn't empty. It was full. Full of unread messages, quiet apologies, and words no one had said when I was still inside that building. They came slowly then all at once. Notes from interns I mentored. Emails from engineers I stayed late to help. Even a QA lead I hadn't spoken to in years sent a voice note just to say she remembered how I made her feel seen. One message stood out. It was from Josh, a back-end dev who had joined 2 years after me. He'd always been steady, thoughtful, a little quiet in meetings, but sharp. He said he heard what happened, and he wasn't surprised. He also said he had an idea. We met at a cafe, not the same one from before. This one had softer chairs, warmer lights, and less noise. Josh didn't waste time. He told me he'd been thinking about a platform built for real people. Not flashy investors, not buzzword addicts. Just people trying to build something honest. He called it Plainfield. The idea was simple. A workspace for small teams and nonprofits who didn't want their data harvested or their tools buried in ads. Clean interfaces, real privacy, no manipulation. I listened quietly at first, letting the words sink in. I had drawn something like that once on a napkin after a long deployment night. I pulled up a folder on my phone. Someday it was called. Inside were sketches, notes, and wireframes I hadn't looked at in years. Josh grinned when he saw them. He said this wasn't about revenge. It was about building differently. About doing what we wished someone had done for us. So, we started. Late nights, shared screens, delivery dinners, whiteboards full of crossings out and arrows. I focused on structure stability and encryption. He handled UI onboarding logic and documentation written like a human would actually read it. We argued about color schemes, laughed at bugs, spent hours talking about nothing and somehow still coding. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to protect something broken. I was building something right. Plainfield didn't promise disruption. It promised clarity. No jargon, no hidden traps, just a system that worked, respected people's time, and let them breathe. And somewhere in that process, I felt something shift inside me. Not a fire, not a battle cry, just a quiet alignment. A click back into place. This time, I wasn't in the background. I was at the start, not chasing recognition, just choosing where and how to begin again. A month after we launched the first beta of Plainfield, I got an article forwarded to me. The headline was clinical, almost detached. Senior engineer resigns from Virion Systems citing leadership failure and internal hostility. It was someone I remembered. A guy named Mason, who joined a year before I left. Talented, kind, the sort of person who stayed late to help others debug without being asked. He had written in his resignation letter that the culture rewarded silence over substance and that integrity had no space there. I read the piece twice, not because I was surprised, but because it landed differently. It wasn't personal anymore. It was a pattern, a system eating itself from the inside. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt calm, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for too long, and now I could finally exhale. It had never been about me. Not my tone, not my experience, not my ability to fit in or keep up. It had been the rot quietly growing under polished glass. I closed the tab without saving it. I didn't need the receipt. I had the truth, and that was enough. 3 months in Plainfield was still small. But it was real. Every line of code, every feature, every message from a user reminded me why we started it in the first place. We didn't chase headlines. We didn't pitch to the loudest investors or design for vanity metrics. We built for people who needed something solid and simple, who didn't want to trade trust for convenience. The teams that joined us first weren't high profile. They were community organizers, librarians, and volunteer networks. And when they sent thank you notes or asked for features, they spoke like partners, not customers. Josh and I found a rhythm we didn't need to explain. He challenged my overthinking. I challenged his shortcuts. And together, we found a way to make decisions that felt right, not rushed. I stopped apologizing for being deliberate. I stopped shrinking to make others more comfortable. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged in the room without earning it twice. And I never once thought about revenge. Not in the sharp way. Not in the way stories usually end. What I had was better. I had peace. I had clarity. I had a place where no one had to lose for me to win. One night after finishing a support module for a school in Vermont, I leaned back in my chair. The screen glowed with the Plainfield logo soft and steady. Not flashy, not loud, just there, like it belonged. And I realized that was enough. No big speech, no triumphant post, just the quiet knowledge that I had built something true. That was the real ending, and the real beginning.